Dear students, this is the part 2 of the particular excerpt, Shyness, My Shield, written by M.K. Gandhi. So this is the text explanation which we have today, which is the second part. We shall have a recollection of the last part. So earlier we learnt that Gandhi was unable to speak and he joined the Vegetarian Society. There was a kind of disorder and disagreement in the Vegetarian Society. The liberal views of Dr. Allinson were not considered. They were not taken strongly, but were taken in a negative manner. Instead of positively admiring his views, it was taken negatively, and he was even made to go away from the society. So here Gandhi wanted to voice out his view, but what happened was left a mystery in the earlier part. We shall continue with the text now, where we left. There were in the committee others also who shared my view, says Gandhi. But I felt myself personally called upon to express my own. How to do it was the question. So he says that personally he was called upon to express his opinion. He wanted to share his view. He wanted to tell what his thoughts were. But however, his thoughts were not conveyed since he was unable to convey it. He was unable to speak out. So that was the question for him. It was because he was not able to express what he wanted to say. He says further, I had not the courage to speak, and I therefore decided to set down my thoughts in writing. I went to the meeting with the document in my pocket. So, as far as I recollect, I didn't find myself equal even to reading it, and the president had it read by someone else. So see what happened. He had even written a particular document, a complete document, a complete letter in pages, but he kept it in his pocket. He could not even read it. So after many years, when he was writing this particular autobiography, he says he recollects, he again remembers that he didn't find himself equal even to taking it out from his pocket and reading it out simply. So reading it also was in a way difficult, as is felt by many people who are unable to speak for the first time. So here he says, the president had it read by somebody else, someone else. So someone else read his views. However, what happened? Dr. Allinson lost the day. Thus, in the very first battle of the kind, I found myself siding with the losing party. But I had comfort in the thought that the cause was right. I have a faint recollection that after this incident, I resigned from the committee. So he says that he was siding the losing party. Nobody supports the losing party, but however, as Gandhiji was always ready to speak the truth, he spoke for the truth, and he wrote that letter also with everything, with his views, truthfully. But however, he knew the battle would be lost. But only comfort he had was the thing that he was fighting for a right cause. He was fighting for something good. he was not on the wrong side. So how many people do we think are we on the right side? So Gandhi could think what was right and what was wrong. He could at least make a differentiation that what is right for him and what is wrong for him. I have a faint recollection, he says, that after that incident he didn't remain in the committee for long, and he resigned also from the committee. This shyness, however, he says, he retained it throughout my stay in England. Even when I paid a social call, the presence of half a dozen or more people would strike me dumb. So even he says, his shyness, he retained, he kept it. It always remained with him when he was in England. He even paid a social call also. But when he even visited half a dozen people or more people, it would immediately make him nervous, immediately make him dumb. He could not speak. He says, I once went to Ventnor with Sergeant Mazumdar. We stayed there with a vegetarian family. Mr. Howard, the author of the Ethics of the Diet, was also staying at the same watering place. So he once went to Ventnor. It was a place in England, and he stayed there with a vegetarian family. So he was there with Sergeant Mazumdar and also Mr. Howard. He was a famous writer. He also stayed with him. We met him and he invited us to speak at a meeting for the promotion of vegetarianism. I had ascertained that it was not considered incorrect to read one's speech. So after that, what we learn of Gandhi, he says that he met him, Howard invited him to speak in a meeting for the promotion of vegetarian diet, and he thought that it was not incorrect for somebody else to read one speech, and he thought at least he could now express himself briefly on a piece of paper. He wrote it and he wanted to read it there. I knew that many did so to express coherently and briefly. To speak extempore. What is extempore? Extempore means fluently at the very first instance without any preparation. So he says, to speak extempore would have been out of the question for me. I had therefore written down my speech. So even he writes down his speech because he was not in a manner where he could express himself, where he could at least try to say something which he was opinionated with. So he therefore wrote it. I stood up to read it but could not. What happened then? My vision became blurred, he says, and I trembled, though the speech hardly covered a sheet of foolscap. Sergeant Mazumdar had to read it for me. So what happened? His vision, everyone feels the same thing. When they are completely nervous, when they are completely shy, when they are completely fearful, they are afraid of something, what happens? Their vision becomes blurred, their eyesight becomes blurred, and they are unable to stand, they are unable to see something before them. So he says he trembled, he shook, he could not stand properly, so he could not even see anything also. However, he says that his speech was hardly even a sheet, even a small sheet, a note. It was hardly some 4 to 5 lines, but he says he couldn't at all think of reading it because everything happened in the negative. He could not stand, he could not see anything, everything became blurred, everything became very, very much, you can say, not visible to him. He was not able to stand. He was completely nervous. He was unable to face anything. Then what happened? Sergeant Mazumdar had to read that one. His own speech was of course excellent and was received with applause. What is applause? With praise. So his speech was very excellent. That means his tone, the way in which he spoke it was very nice, very excellent. And it was also received with applause. Applause means appreciation, praise. Everything was happy with the way in which he spoke. He says, I was ashamed of myself and sad at heart for my incapacity. Now Gandhi felt very much ashamed, very much shy, very much, you can say he felt very much alarmed. He felt very sad, very sorrowful, very hurt. He felt that in his heart. Why he was so incapable? What happened to him? What was the thing which went wrong when he wanted to speak something? So he says, my last effort to make a public speech in England was on the eve of my departure for home. But this time too, I only succeeded in making myself ridiculous. I invited my vegetarian friends to dinner in the Holborn restaurant referred to in these chapters. So he says the last effort which he made was to make a public speech in England during his farewell. So at least during his departure, his farewell, he wanted to speak out something. So he said that he wanted to speak out, but he only succeeded, he only made himself look more ridiculous, more funny, more incapable of speaking anything. What happened? He says it briefly. He invites his vegetarian friends to dinner in some restaurant called the Holborn restaurant. So it was a vegetarian restaurant. It was a vegetarian dinner they all had. So he says, and I arranged with the manager of the Holborn restaurant to provide a strictly vegetarian meal. The vegetarians hailed the new experiment with delight. All dinners are meant for enjoyment, but the West has developed the thing into an art. So everyone, everywhere, what do they consider? Every dinner is meant for people to gather, people to be happy, people to meet, and people to eat. And it was for enjoyment, it was for some happy gathering. But however, in the West, in the western part, that means the Britishers and the people, the English, the Anglicans, or the French, or someone, they're all Western countries. So these Westerners had developed this thing into an art. It was a kind of skill which everyone cannot have. They celebrated these with great eclat, with music, with speeches, great eclat. Eclat means with style, with pomp, with show, with kind of, you can say, kind of happiness, a kind of, you can say, greatness. So with music, with speeches and everything. And the little dinner party that I gave was also not unaccompanied by such sort of display. Speeches therefore had to be, and when my turn for speaking came, I stood up to make a speech. I had with great care thought out one which would consist of a very few sentences, but I couldn't proceed beyond the first sentence. So he says that speeches were to be made. So it was a custom of England, and he stood up to give a speech, but he could not proceed beyond the first sentence. He says he started with the sentence of Addison, a very famous writer. So he repeated, I conceive. So just as Addison made his maiden speech in the House of Commons, I conceived 3 times he told and made himself ridiculous. Like that, he also could not proceed any further. And then the gentleman conceived thrice but brought forth nothing. That was what fun was made of his speech. So he thought that such sort of humorous speech could be started with such sort of anecdote. He therefore began it, but he was stuck there. He could not speak further. So his memory entirely failed him. In attempting a humorous speech, I made myself look ridiculous. That's what he says. And I thank you, gentlemen, for having kindly responded to my invitation. I said abruptly and sat down. So what does Gandhiji do towards the end? He could not say anything. His memory, his thought process failed, and so this humorous speech was stopped, and he only thought of stopping the speech by thanking the gentleman for having come there, for having been responded to his invitation, and he stops there. Let's stop here, dear students.